like a pinpoint where it came in, and then it gets bigger here and it gets bigger here.
Sioux Falls police say the crime spree that left bullets scattered around her home started around midnight with a stabbing at 11th Street and Summit Avenue. 25-year-old St. Louis resident Mark Morgan was treated and released from a Sioux Falls hospital for multiple stab wounds. Minutes after that call, officers responded to reports of shots fired at 2708 Pioneer Trail. The woman we talked to, who did not want to be identified, says she thinks her boyfriend's 17-year-old brother was the intended target because of an ongoing feud with people who've tried to attack him before. She says he'd heard rumors that the group had a gun and were looking for him. She says the assailants caught up with the boy here at this parking lot. They ambushed him and began firing. Fortunately, he escaped unharmed and called police.
They have given us the name of a suspect that the officers are looking for at this point. I don't have an indication of the motive or why they think this person might be the suspect.
The woman on Pioneer Trail hopes police have the suspect in custody soon because she worries whoever came last night could strike again, and next time someone could get hurt. In Sioux Falls, Beth Fuller, News 5.
Police continue their investigation and are still following leads. If you have any information, you're asked to call the Sioux Falls Police Department or Crime Stoppers.
A 14-year-old boy pleaded not guilty today to charges of murder, kidnapping, robbery, and grand theft. Paul Dean Jensen Jr. became the second teenager accused in the January 26th killing of Michael Hare, a Pier taxi driver who was robbed and then shot 3 times. A grand jury met this morning and indicted Jensen on 11 counts. 17-year-old Sean Springer of Marshall, Minnesota is the other charged in that death. If convicted of murder or kidnapping, 14-year-old Jensen faces a minimum sentence of life in prison, a maximum sentence of death by lethal injection.
A Nebraska man is in jail on charges he assaulted a Brookings police officer. 30-year-old Edward Blaze Kula is charged with attempting to ram Brookings police officer Gail Handegard at a roadblock, driving while under the influence of alcohol, eluding police, reckless driving, and driving while his license was revoked. Kula allegedly led police on a long chase Saturday.
An environmental trust fund for the city of Sioux Falls, created with a penalty payment from the John Morellen Company, will stay under federal control. The company paid a $3 million fine for polluting the Big Sioux River in Sioux Falls. $1 million will be set aside to create an environmental trust fund for projects to clean up or enhance the use of the river. Sioux Falls City Attorney Janet Brecky says any proposal to spend the money must be approved by a federal judge. Well, as News 512 at 10 continues tonight, despite today's break from the recent rain and cool weather, 80 to 90% of the cropland north of Highway 14 is not planted because of flooding.
As Sean Boyd reports tonight, the more time goes by, the more farmers become concerned.
This is the scene across much of northern South Dakota. Water and mud stands where seedlings should be. An extremely wet spring with little sun is making cropland impossible to plant. Jerry Odegaard has been farming here for more than 40 years.
Well, I've never seen anything like this. Not continuous. You might get a year of flooding, you know, get part of it drowned out, but I've never seen it hang on like this.
Of his 800 acres of cropland, he has only planted 119 acres. His land is especially vulnerable to flooding. It sits along the Big Sioux River. When his farmland turned to swampland more than 4 years ago, Jerry Odegaard wonders, what does the future hold for his son and other young farmers?
Depressing situation. You feel worse for your... Well, I've got a young son started farming with me last year, and he really hasn't had much to look forward to, you know, and for a young farmer, it's very tough. It's very, very hard.
Richard Intermill is one of the lucky ones. He's planting today. His land is spread out and farther south. It's also very sandy, which allows the water to seep away.
We appreciate this light soil now, but if it don't rain, that's when the corn is knee-high twice, once coming up and once going down.
June 5th is the deadline for Odegaard's soybean insurance, but he hasn't even planted most of his corn yet. That insurance deadline was May 25th. Now all he can hope for is dry weather and a better crop next year.
When you look forward to next year, you know, you wonder where the money's going to come from to put the crop in, and that's a problem.
Near Bruce, Sean Boyd, News 5.
In World Watch tonight, in Israel, election exit polls show opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu has pulled slightly ahead of Prime Minister Shimon Peres.
The FBI does not want journalists contacting the Freeman. And a California appeals court has overturned Hollywood Madam Heidi Fleiss's conviction on pandering charges. In a scathing opinion, the court ruled that jurors had turned the trial into a farce by engaging in misconduct to avoid a deadlock. Scott Bowden joins us now with our first look at weather. And Scott, we almost have nothing to talk about because all the rain moved away. We have sunshine. Today, before his sentencing, Jose Sanchez prayed for more than an hour, criticizing the United States government and treatment he's received in the Minnehaha County Jail. Sanchez did not talk about his earlier admission of stabbing Calixio Ornales last July. He had claimed it was in self-defense and that the two men were fighting over a woman. Judge Jean Paul Keene handed down the sentence today. He says even though the victim was a homeless, illegal immigrant, his murder is as serious as any murder.
The Sioux Falls man involved in a standoff with police in February was sentenced today for the crime which led to the standoff. 38-year-old David Iwerks received a 12-and-a-half-year sentence for second-degree rape. He admits to raping and threatening a woman with a gun earlier this year. When police confronted him about the incident, he refused to leave his home and threatened suicide. Today, Iwerks told the judge he was drunk at the time and doesn't remember the incident, but said he trusts the woman who reported it and is trying to have a relationship with her.
A former Watertown disc jockey pleaded guilty today to 2 counts of sexual contact with a child under the age of 16. 37-year-old Dan Dahlgren's guilty plea was part of a plea agreement to drop 1 count of second-degree rape and 2 counts of sexual contact. Dahlgren was a radio announcer with KDLO, KIXX, and KWAT in Watertown until he was arrested last August. Dahlgren has been released on $25,000 bond until his sentencing, which is June 28th. Each of the sexual contact charges carries a 15-year maximum in prison and a $15,000 fine.
The U.S. Supreme Court gave the go-ahead today for national banks to charge late payment fees for credit card holders, even if states ban such levies. The decision could net hundreds of millions of dollars each year for the banks. In the credit card case, the court said national banks that locate their home base in friendly states like South Dakota are allowed to charge interest on credit card balances at rates permitted by the state. The court adds the late payment fees are included in federal banking law's definition of interest. South Dakota has no ceiling on interest charges. Citibank officials say the ruling is a victory for free market pricing. As News 5 12 at 10 continues, South Dakotans head to the polls tomorrow to define the shape of the November general election.
In the primary tomorrow, Minnehaha County Republican voters will choose 2 GOP candidates to appear on the County Commission general election ballot. Incumbents Robert Colby and Jerry Noonan are running for re-election. Robert Himrick, and Brett Songstad are also trying for the seats. In the U.S. House race, Carol Hillard and John Thune are running for the Republican ballot. Democratic voters will choose between Jim Abbott, Rick Weiland, Linda Stensland, and Dennis Jones. Now, if one candidate in the Democratic race does not get 35% of the vote, the top 2 vote-getters will have a runoff election. Minnehaha County polling places will be open from 8 a.m. until 7 p.m. tomorrow. Secretary of State Joyce Hazeltine says she thinks 44% of Republicans and 34% of Democrats will vote in tomorrow's state primary. She bases her prediction on similar elections in previous years.
A veteran state politician is calling it quits on the South Dakota Public Utilities Commission. 62-year-old Ken Stoffern, a Democrat, has served on the PUC since 1978. Stoffern says he's decided it's time to do something else. He was found guilty in 1994 of using his state phone for non-government purposes in order to pay restitution and do 50 hours of community service work. Democrats will meet later this month at their state convention to pick a candidate for the general election ballot.
Well, an interim president has been named to succeed current University of South Dakota president, Dr. Betty Turner Asher. The South Dakota Board of Regents today named Paul Olskamp to the interim post. Olskamp is the former president of Bowling Green State University in Ohio. His duties will run from August to June of next year. Dr. Asher announced last month she would resign at the end of June.
In regional news tonight, 4 Iowa business leaders died yesterday when their plane crashed into a swamp north of Aiken near Blind Lake, Minnesota. The 4 men were returning from a fishing trip in Canada. Searchers found the Piper Malibu upright, missing a portion of the tail and wing. Authorities are unsure whether yesterday's rainstorms and wind could have contributed to the crash. The 4 men were from Ottumwa, Iowa. The Federal Aviation Administration is investigating that accident.
Last week, News 5 brought you the story of a local family battling a rare genetic disorder. Tonight, a benefit concert is being held in honor of Paul Van Voren and his family. Paul has von Hippel-Lindau syndrome, which causes tumors to grow throughout the body. His mother died from it. His sisters are struggling with it. Donna Chappell organized the event and is tonight's mistress of ceremonies.
Together with a unified feeling of caring for Paul and his family, and that's my goal for the evening, is just one big, happy, good feeling going through the whole crowd.
Paul Van Voren says he cannot express in words how he feels.
It's up and down. You got a lot of friends showing up and a lot of people I don't know, and it's just it's a good feeling knowing that people care and that you know, they're going to come out for something like this.
Now, if you weren't able to make it to the benefit tonight in Sioux Falls, you can still drop off donations at any Norwest Bank location.
In World Watch tonight, 2 more tests for the AIDS virus are available. The Food and Drug Administration today approved an oral test used to detect infection. The other test is aimed at determining how fast patients with the deadly disease will sicken. Studies show that patients with high HIV blood levels are more likely to sicken quickly. Crash investigators, meantime, have wanted to find electrical circuit breakers from ValueJet Flight 592 to see if they might have caused the fire aboard the doomed airliner. They say they've now found a part of the circuit breaker panel. Federal agents say a trucker hauling wreckage had stolen it.
It could be dark tonight inside the Freeman compound in Montana. The FBI pulled the plug on electricity to the ranch today in an effort to push the 71-day-old standoff to a close. Neighbors say they're certain the Freeman have power generators of their own. Scott Bowden sitting in our weather center, and I think we're all ready to turn that heat back up outside.
The quiet race that led to a negative campaign in just the final few days.
It's the race for the United States House, a seat left vacant by Congressman Tim Johnson, who's now running for the U.S. Senate. And while a runoff election among the 4 Democratic candidates was expected, it appears with 814 of the 883 precincts in, that former Tom Daschle aide Rick Weiland appears to be the winner tonight with 16,400 votes. Weiland has 42% of the vote. Now, 35% of the vote was needed to win. Yankton businessman Jim Abbott is running in second place with 28% of the votes tonight, followed by Dennis Jones with 18%, Linda Stensland, who carried 13% of the vote. Now, again, with one candidate needing at least 35% to claim victory tonight, it appears Rick Weiland in his first bid for office, who has 42% so far with 814 of the precincts in. Just 19 precincts are still out. Here's what he had to say just a few minutes ago about tonight's result in the race against projected winner John Thune.
That you can think of?
Well, I think that, you know, starting with how we get this budget balance, I think there's a huge difference. I mean, he's obviously supported, you know, the Gingrich approach in this, you know, in this campaign, talking about basically, you know, cutting taxes for people in this country that I would argue don't need their taxes cut, you know, millionaires and on up, you know, being willing to make the cuts in student loans and those kinds of programs that I think are investments in our country, things that will save us money in the long run. There are a lot of differences, and we'll have several months to talk about them.
Supporters of Democratic candidate Rick Weiland are joining the Weiland family for a primary election party at the Howard Johnson's in Sioux Falls. This is Weiland's first attempt at running for a public office, but he's not new to South Dakota politics. He has worked for Senator Tom Daschle for several years.
Democratic candidate Jim Abbott, meantime, is holding a primary election party with his supporters tonight at the Sioux Falls Brewery downtown in Sioux Falls. Abbott is a Yankton businessman who has served in the state legislature. He claimed 28% of the Democratic vote tonight with just a few precincts out, as we mentioned. In 1994, Abbott ran unsuccessfully for South Dakota's Democratic lieutenant governor. Democratic candidate Linda Stensland, meantime, is having a private party for friends and family at her home in Sioux Falls tonight. Stensland is by no means new to South Dakota politics. She spent 4 years in the state house, 4 years in the state senate. Well, again, it appears tonight that a victory march goes out to the relative newcomer in the Republican race for November's general election.
Republican John Thune carried a commanding lead all night as the final votes were being tallied. With 814 of the 883 precincts in, it appears Thune carried through with 38,979 votes, or 60%. Lieutenant Governor Carol Hillard, meantime, has 26,129 votes, or 40%. Republican candidate John Thune began the evening in Pierre with friends and family. He then flew to Sioux Falls to join supporters at the Radisson Encore Inn for a post-election party. Throughout the night, Thune has held a commanding lead over Carol Hillard. Even though this is Thune's first campaign for public office, Hillard is the state's current lieutenant governor.
Moving on to the local field, it appears much of the political landscape will be staying the same.
Incumbent Minnehaha County Commissioners Robert Colby and Jerry Noonan win the Republican County Commission primary. Colby collected 34% of the votes and Noonan won 31%. Challengers Bob Hemrick and Brett Songstead each got 18% of the vote.
Meantime, in the race for District 12 State Representative, Hal Wick and Judy Rost advanced to the next election. Wick won 36% of the Republican vote, while Rost collected 34%. 30% of the voters cast ballots for Michael Weiland. Well, voter turnout here in Minnehaha County was relatively low. As a matter of fact, earlier tonight, election officials were calling it depressing. 27% of Republicans voted today, while 22% of registered Democrats went to the polls. Well, in other political news tonight, News 5 has learned of impending changes at South Dakota's U.S. Marshal's office.
Sources have informed KDLT Davidson County Sheriff Lyle Swenson is expected to be named the new U.S. Marshal within a week. Swenson joined the Davidson County Department in 1961 and has been sheriff since 1965. The Mitchell area officer has been nominated as a candidate for the U.S. Marshal job twice before. Robert Eckoffey resigned from the South Dakota's Marshal post earlier this year. Senator Tom Daschle's office in Washington says the senator hopes to make an official announcement within a week.
As News 512 at 10 continues tonight, a Brookings man who pleaded guilty to murdering his former girlfriend was sentenced today in Brookings. 26-year-old Timothy Dopp was given the mandatory life in prison sentence for second-degree murder in the October death of his former girlfriend, Lorna Amiat. According to court documents, Dopp was also given a 10-year sentence for aggravated assault, which he'll serve concurrently with his life sentence. The Brookings County Court today accepted Dopp's plea of guilty but mentally ill. Dopp will not be eligible for parole.
In other court news tonight, a federal judge has ruled that a 12-year-old boy can testify in the trial of a South Dakota man accused of kidnapping him and his 3-year-old brother. 24-year-old Boyd Dean Weekly is accused of driving a stolen car from South Dakota and kidnapping the boys last October outside a Benton Harbor, Michigan convenience store. He's standing trial for kidnapping, transporting a child across state lines with intent to sexually assault, and driving a stolen car across state lines. A U.S. district judge also selected 12 jurors to hear the case against Weekly.
A local family is without a home tonight after a morning fire that continued into this evening. Firefighters from Split Rock Township and Brandon have been at the scene of the house fire east of Sioux Falls all day. When they arrived about 10 this morning, fire officials say the home on East Callie's Place was fully engulfed. Crews had a difficult time battling that blaze because of numerous roofs and false ceilings in the structure, the result of several additions onto the home. It's believed the blaze may have started in the kitchen area and is a total loss. Family members were able to recover some belongings. The American Red Cross is helping the family tonight who's staying in a motel. No one was injured in the fire, however. One firefighter was treated for heat exhaustion.
In World Watch tonight, a European rocket carrying the latest in satellite technology exploded this morning in South America less than 1 minute after its launch. The Ariane 5 rocket was unmanned and was blown up on purpose after launch officials say the rocket veered off course. They feared it could have crashed into the Earth. The Ariane 5 was built at a cost of $7 billion. The rocket also carried 4 satellites, which were all destroyed.
The Navy's second-in-command is expected to be named to the top naval post tomorrow at the Pentagon. Administration officials say Admiral Jay Johnson will succeed Admiral Mike Borda, who committed suicide last month as Navy chief. And on a lighter note, Scott Bowden with First Weather tonight.
Student Carrie Risley grew tired of friends in her native California.